Thank you for coming. It's great to be back at Palenque Norte, back on the playa. So the talk I'm going to do today is a talk that I wrote for DEF CON, and I gave that talk at DEF CON a couple of weeks ago. You're the second audience to ever hear it. Some of you may have read an lightly edited transcript I put online, but pretty similar to that. I like to think I bring something to it live. I'm going to talk for about an hour, and then we can do Q&A outside because there's another speaker coming in. That works for everyone. So, thank you. The name of the talk is Disenshittify or Die: How Hackers Can Seize the Means of Computation and Build a New Good Internet That Is Hardened Against Our Asshole Bosses' Insatiable Horniness for Enshittification. The title. And it starts like this. What the fuck happened to the old good internet? I mean, sure, our bosses were a little surveillance happy, and they were usually up for sharing their data with the NSA, and whenever there was a toss-up between user security and growth, it was always YOLO time. But Google search used to work. Facebook used to show you posts from the people that you followed. Uber used to be a cheaper taxi that paid the drivers more. Amazon used to sell products, not shine-grade, self-destructing dropship garbage from all-consonant brands you've never heard of. And Apple used to defend your privacy rather than spying on you with the no modifications allowed iPhone. There was a time when searching for an album on Spotify actually got you that album, not a playlist of insipid AI-generated covers that has the same name and art as the album you searched for. And Microsoft used to actually sell you software, albeit buggy software, but now they just let you access apps that run in the cloud. They watch how you use those apps. They pull the features you use the most out of the basic tier and resell them to you as an upsell. I cannot stress this enough, what the fuck happened? So I'm of course talking about enshittification, and from the outside, here's what enshittification looks like. First, you see a company that is good to its end users. Google puts the best search results at the top. Facebook shows you a feed of posts from people you follow. Uber charges small dollars for a cab. Amazon subsidizes goods and returns and shipping and puts the best match for your product at the top of your search results. And that is stage one, being good to the end users. But there's another part of that stage, you could call it stage like 1B, and which is figuring out how to lock in those users. And there are so many ways to lock in users. If you're Facebook, the users do it for you. You joined Facebook because there were people there you wanted to talk to, and then other people joined Facebook because they wanted to hang out with you, and that is, of course, the old network effects in action. And network effects come with the collective action problem, because you love your friends, but goddamn are they a pain in the ass. And you all agree that Facebook sucks, of course, but you can't agree on when it's time to leave. Hell no. You can't agree on where to go next. You're there because that's where the support group for your rare disease is hanging out. And your bestie is there because that's where they talk with the people in the country that they moved away from. And then there's that friend who coordinates her kids' Little League games on Facebook. And the best dungeon master you know, all of their customers are on Facebook, so they're not leaving anytime soon. So you're all stuck because even though Facebook use comes at a high cost, your privacy, your dignity, maybe your sanity, there's still, those costs are still less than the switching cost that you'd have to bear if you stop being a Facebook user. And that cost is, of course, all those friends who are holding you hostage and whom you are also holding hostage. Now, that's not the only way to lock users in. Sometimes companies just lock you in with money, like Amazon, which gets you to prepay for a year's shipping before you start the year, which means that every time you look for something, you might as well start on Amazon because you already paid to ship it. Sometimes companies lock you in with digital rights management. Like HP, they sell you a printer that has 4 ink cartridges. They're filled with tinted liquid that costs more than $10,000 a gallon. And they use DRM to stop you refilling that with cheaper tinted liquid. So if one cartridge runs dry and you're like, fuck this, I'm not gonna refill it, you have to throw away 3 more cartridges still full of $10,000 a gallon printed liquid. Sometimes companies, they use a grab bag of all of these techniques. Like, you can't run your iOS app unless you have Apple hardware. You can't play the media that the Apple Store sold you unless you have an iOS app running on Apple hardware. And your iPhone has parts pairing. This is digital rights management at the component level, so that if you get it fixed by someone who's not Apple, it won't recognize the part, even if that came out of a donor iPhone, until an Apple technician types the unlock code. And every OEM part in your iPhone comes with a microscopic Apple logo engraved on it, so that if they send that phone overseas to be broken up in a sweatshop and returned to the US as parts, Apple can have it seized at the border as tarnishment of their trademark. That is real thinking different. So getting you locked in, it completes phase 1 of the enshittification cycle, and it signals the start of phase 2, which is making things worse for you in order to make things better for some business customers. For example, platforms might poison their search results, like Google, which sells more and more of that results page with ads that are identified with smaller and smaller type printed in lighter and lighter gray, or Amazon that sells off its search results and calls it an ad business, making $38 billion a year selling ad placement. And as a result, if you search on Amazon, that first result in the Amazon results page is on average 29% more expensive than the best match for your query. The top row on average is 25% more expensive than the best match on Amazon for your query, and on average, to get the best buy on Amazon for a query, you have to go down 17 places on Amazon. Other platforms, they sell off your feed, like Facebook, which started off showing you things that you asked to see, but now the quantum of content on Facebook that comes from the people you follow has dwindled to a kind of homeopathic residue. And this leaves behind this gigantic void that they can fill with things that people will pay to show you. Boosted posts from the publishers that you've already subscribed to, and of course, ads. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, of course, you're not paying for the product, so you're the product. But I'm here to tell you today that that is absolute fucking bullshit. The people who buy Google ads, they pay more every year for worse targeting and more ad fraud. The publishers who are paying to non-consensually cram their content into your eyeballs on your Facebook feed, they have to do that because Facebook suppresses the ability of publishers to reach the people who have actually asked to see the content that they post. The Amazon sellers with the best match for your query have to outbid everyone else just to show up in the first line of search results for it. And it costs so much now to sell on Amazon that between 45 and 51% of every sale that a third-party seller makes on Amazon has to be kicked up to Don Bezos and the Amazon crime family. Now, those sellers do not have the kinds of margins that let them kick up 51% VIGs. They have to raise prices in order to avoid losing money on every sale. But wait, I hear you say. But wait! Things on Amazon aren't more expensive than the things you buy somewhere else, at Target, at Walmart, from a mom and pop store, direct from the manufacturer. How is it that sellers are raising prices 41 to 51% on Amazon, but able to charge the same on Amazon as they charge everyone else? Does anyone have a guess as to how that works? Go ahead. Oh, that's not quite it, yes?
Walmart has written their algorithm so that they price match.
Nope, not quite.
Amazon forces you to sell for the lowest price.
That's right. Amazon has the most favored nation status deal that says that your lowest price has to be offered on Amazon, which means that if you have to raise your price 45% in order to break even on Amazon, you also have to raise your price 45% at Walmart, at Target, and at your own direct retail store. Those Amazon sellers, they are Amazon's best customers. They are paying for the product, and they are still getting screwed. Paying for the product does not fill your vapid boss's shriveled heart with so much joy that he decides to stop trying to think of ways to fuck you over. I mean, look at Apple. Do you remember when Apple offered every iOS user a one-click opt-out so that they didn't get spied on by their apps anymore? 96% of iOS users clicked the "Don't spy on me" box. The other 4% were presumably either Facebook employees or drunk Facebook employees, which frankly is a condition that I can understand. That one box ticked by 96% of people, cost Facebook $10 billion the first year it was in operation. It continues to cost Facebook billions of dollars every year. We love to see it, but did you know that at the very same moment that Apple was offering the box so that other apps couldn't spy on you, they were rolling out their own iOS level surveillance that was gathering behavioral data for their ad service, gathering exactly the same data, and you couldn't opt out of it. Your iPhone is not an ad-supported gimme. You paid $1,000 for the distraction rectangle in your pocket, and you are still the product. What's more, Apple rigged iOS so that you can't tweak the app to turn off the surveillance and block the spying. If you're not paying for the product, you're still the product. If you are paying for the product, you are also the product. Just ask farmers who are expected to swap parts into their own John Deere tractors, but those parts are not recognized by the John Deere tractor until they pay $200 for a John Deere technician to come out and type an unlock code into the keyboard in the tractor. John Deere does not give away tractors. If you give John Deere $500,000 for a mission critical tractor, you will still be the product. Please, my brothers and sisters in Christ, please stop saying if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. All right, so that is stage 2 of enshittification. Phase 1, being good to users, finding a way to lock them in. Phase 2, screw the users a little so that you can be good to business customers while locking them in because they need those users. And phase 3, screw everyone and take all the value for yourself. Leave behind the absolute bare minimum of utility so that everyone stays locked into your pile of shit. Enshittification, a tragedy in 3 acts. So that's what enshittification looks like from the outside, but what is going on inside the company while it's enshittifying? What is the pathological mechanism? What sci-fi entropy ray converts the excellent and useful services that we used to use into piles of shit? I call that mechanism twiddling. Twiddling is when someone alters the back end of a service to change how its business operates, changing the prices, the costs, the search ranking, the recommendation criteria, and other foundational aspects of the system. And digital platforms are a twiddler's utopia. A grocer would need an army of teenagers with pricing guns on roller skates to reprice all the goods in the grocery store if you walk through the door and they estimated that you'd be willing to pay a little extra.
They just did it though.
I'm getting there. Whereas McDonald's Investments has a portfolio company called Plexure, and they advertise that they can use surveillance data to predict when your payday is and charge you an extra $1 for the breakfast sandwich you order with your app that morning. And of course, the great prophet William Gibson has told us cyberspace is averting. And so now with digital shelf tags, grocers can change prices whenever they like, as the grocers in Norway, which was the first place where we saw a major rollout of this, have done, changing prices in each store up to 2,000 times per day. Every Uber driver is offered a different wage on every job. If the driver has been picky lately, the job pays more. But if the driver has been desperate enough to say yes to whatever job the app offered them, their pay goes down and down and down. The law professor Vina Dougal, she calls this algorithmic wage discrimination. It's a prime example of how twiddling works. Every YouTuber, they know what it means to be twiddled. You work for weeks or for months, you spend thousands of dollars making a video, and the algorithm decides that no one, not even your own subscribers who've asked to see the things that you post, not searchers who type in the exact name of your video, get to see your video. Why is that? Who the fuck knows? The algorithm's rules are not public because content moderation is the last realm in which we treat security through obscurity as a best practice. YouTube they can't tell you how the content moderation algorithm works because if they do, you'll figure out how to violate that algorithm and get paid even when you've done something that they don't want to pay you for. YouTube is the kind of shitty boss who docks your paycheck by 50% every time it's payday for breaking rules, but won't tell you what rules you broke in case you figure out how to break those rules next time without him noticing it. Now, twiddling can also work in a user's favor. Sometimes platforms twiddle things to make things better for their end users or for their business customers. For example, there's a Forbes reporter named Emily Baker White who did a great investigative piece on a secret back-end feature at TikTok called the heating tool. When a manager applies a heating tool to a performer's account, that performer's videos are thrust into the feeds of millions of users whom the algorithm does not predict they'll like to see it. Now, why would they do this? Well, there's an analogy I like to use here from my own boyhood. I grew up in Toronto. I'm a Canadian. We're like serial killers. We're everywhere. We look just like everyone else. And in Toronto, we had a summer fair every year called the Canadian National Exhibition, the X. And if you went down to the X, by 10 o'clock in the morning, down on the Midway, there'd be a guy walking around with a giant teddy bear. Now, nominally, the way to win that giant teddy bear is you get 5 balls in a peach basket. But to a first approximation, no one in the history of the X ever got 5 balls in a peach basket. That guy won his teddy bear because a carny singled him out and said, "Come here, fella, I like your face. I tell you what I'm going to do. You get just 1 ball out of these 5 in the peach basket. I'm going to give you a keychain. You do it again, you amass 2 keychains. I'm going to let you trade up for one of these galactic scale teddy bears." That's how the guy got that giant teddy bear, which he is now stuck dragging up and down the Midway all day. Why the hell did the carny give this guy his teddy bear? Because it turns that guy into a walking advertisement for giving him $5 and trying to get 5 peach balls in the peach basket. If that dopey-looking Judas goat can get 5 balls in the peach basket, surely you can too. Except you can't. TikTok's heating tool is a way to give away tactical giant teddy bears. When someone in TikTok's brain trust decides that they need more sports bros on the platform, they pick one bro out at random and make him king for the day, heating the shit out of his account, and that guy gets a bazillion views and starts running around in all the sports bro forums, trumpeting his success. "I am the Louis Pasteur of sports bro content makers." The other sports bros all pile in and they start retooling to make content optimized for that very idiosyncratic TikTok first format. And when they fail to get their giant teddy bear, they blame themselves. They think they must be doing TikTok wrong because no one except TikTok, until Emily Baker White came along, knew about this heating tool. But then comes the day when the Star Chamber at TikTok decides we've got enough sports bro content on the platform and we need to lure in more astrologers. And so they take the heat off the sports bros and they apply it to some random astrologer, and she brings in more astrologers. Giant teddy bears are everywhere you look. Do you remember in the early days of Uber, the New York Times was running stories about Uber drivers who are making 6-figure salaries driving Uber, or Substackers who are getting millions of dollars for running a Substack, or Joe Rogan who got his $100 million Spotify payout? Those people are all the proud owners of giant teddy bears, and they don't know it. Giving those guys giant teddy bears is a fucking bargain, because every dollar that a platform gives to someone in the form of a giant teddy bear turns into $5 worth of free labor from someone who doesn't know that it's a giant teddy bear. And those giant teddy bears, they're just one kind of twiddling. Platforms play games with every part of their business logic in highly automated ways that allows them to quickly and efficiently siphon value from business customers and give it to end users, then from end users and give it to business customers, and then from both and to themselves. They're hiding the P in a shell game played at machine speeds until they've got everyone so turned around that no one can find the P anymore because they've taken all the value for themselves. And that is how. That is how the platforms do the trick, where they are good to users, then locking users in, then being worse to users and being good to business customers and locking them in, and then taking all the value for themselves. So that is what is happening, and that is how it is happening, but it isn't why it's happening. Now, on the one hand, there's a pretty obvious answer to why platforms are trying to take more value for themselves. The less value that end users and business customers capture from the platform, the more value there is left to divide up between the executives and the shareholders. That's why, but it's not really why now. Companies could have done this shit in years gone by, but they didn't, or at least the successful ones didn't do it. The ones that turned themselves into piles of shit in years gone by, they got treated like piles of shit. We avoided them and they died. Do you remember MySpace? Do you remember Yahoo Search? Do you remember LiveJournal? Sure, if you go to those domains, you'll find some AI slop or programmatic ads, but those platforms are just gone. And there's the clue. It used to be that if you enshittified your product, bad things happened to the company. Now there are no consequences for enshittification, and so everyone is enshittifying. So we'll break that down. What stops a company from enshittifying? there are four forces that discipline tech companies. The first one is obviously competition. If your customers find it easy to leave, then you have to worry that they're going to leave. Many factors can contribute to how hard it is to leave a platform, like the network effects that Facebook has going for it. But the most important factor about whether people can leave your platform is whether there's another platform to go to. Now, back in 2012, Facebook bought a company, tiny company very few people had heard of, called Instagram, for $1 billion. And that seems like chump change today in the era of 11-figure big tech takeovers. But it was a large sum in those innocent days a decade ago. And it was an especially large sum to pay for Insta, which at the time was a company with 13 employees and only 25 million registered users, most of whom logged in once and didn't come back. But what mattered to Zuck was not how many users Insta had, it was where those users were coming from. Does anyone know where those Insta users were coming from? Facebook. They were leaving Facebook and joining Insta. They were sick of Facebook, and even though they liked the people there, they hated creepy Zuck. They hated the platform. They left and they didn't come back. So Zuck spent a cool $1 billion to recapture those users. And he put that fact in writing in a midnight email to his CFO at the time, was a guy called David Ebersman, explaining that the reason he was paying $1 billion for this tiny company was because users hated him and loved Instagram, so even if they quit Facebook, the platform, they would still be users of Facebook, the company. Now on paper, this is an illegal acquisition, and under normal circumstances, it'd be very hard to prove that this was an illegal acquisition because the basis on which it's illegal is if you're doing it to reduce competition, which means that competition regulators need to be able to peer in the mind of the CEO and determine whether this was an acquisition undertaken on an anti-competitive basis or just because they thought there'd be synergy. But in Zuck's case, he's tripping over his own dick. He is sending an email where he puts in writing that he is buying this company to reduce competition. But in that year, 2012, Obama's DOJ and his Federal Trade Commission just let that skate, following the pro-monopoly policies that had been in place since Reagan, carried on by Bush 1, by Clinton, and Bush 2, and setting an example that Trump would go on to follow, greenlighting giga-mergers like the catastrophic, incestuous Warner-Discovery marriage that we're all living through right now. Indeed, for 40 years, starting with Carter and accelerating through Reagan, the US has encouraged monopoly formation as an official policy on the grounds that monopolies are efficient. If everyone is using Google search, that's something we should celebrate because clearly Google has made the very best search engine. And wouldn't it be perverse for the government to step in and punish Google for making the search engine that we all like so much that we've all decided to use it? But as we know, Google's search dominance did not come from having the best search engine. It came from paying bribes, 20 billion plus per year to Apple alone to be the default search on iOS, plus billions more to Samsung, Mozilla, and anyone else who makes a product or service with a search box you can type a query into, which ensures that you will never stumble onto a search engine that is better than Google, which in turn ensures that no one bothers to seriously fund search engines, even if they have ideas that make Google's search algorithm look worse. Why bother making something better than Google if Google has already bought all the market oxygen and there's no way you could kindle your little startup into a fire? Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, they're not making things companies, they're buying things companies. They take advantage of official tolerance for anti-competitive acquisitions, for predatory pricing, for market-distorting exclusivity deals, and other acts that are specifically prohibited by our antitrust laws. Once a company no longer fears losing your business to a competitor, it's much easier for them to treat you badly because what are you going to do? Some of you may remember Lily Tomlin on Saturday Night Live as Ernestine, the AT&T operator, doing ads for the Bell system, and they would always end with, "We don't care, we don't have to, we're the phone company." Competition is the first force that serves to discipline companies and stop the enshittificatory impulses of their leadership. And we just stopped enforcing competition law. It takes a very special kind of smooth-brained asshole that is an establishment economist to insist that the collapse of every industry, from eyeglasses to vitamin C, into a cartel of 5 or fewer companies has nothing to do with the policies we pursued for 40 years, encouraging monopolization. It's like we used to put down this rat poison and we didn't have a rat problem, and these dickheads convinced us that rats were actually good for us. And we stopped putting down rat poison, and now rats are gnawing our faces off, and they're all running around saying, who's to say where all these rats came from? Maybe we're just living through the era of the rats. Maybe there is a historic contingency producing unheralded fecundity among our rat population. Antitrust did not slip down the staircase and fall spine first on that stiletto. They stabbed it in the back and then they fucking pushed it. And when they killed antitrust, they also killed regulation. And regulation is the second force that disciplines companies. Now, regulation is possible, but only when the regulator is bigger and more powerful than the entities that it is seeking to regulate. If a company is bigger than the government, it gets damned hard to credibly convince its leadership that they should fear a regulator stepping in and punishing them for screwing you over. That is what protected IBM for all those years when it had its boots on the throat of the American tech industry. Did you know that the DOJ brought IBM to court for a 12-year antitrust battle that lasted from 1970 to 1982 in an incident that they referred to at the time as Antitrust's Vietnam? And during that period, each year for 12 consecutive years, IBM spent more on outside counsel to fight the DOJ's antitrust lawyers than the DOJ was paying for every antitrust lawyer fighting every antitrust case in the United States of America. They outspent Uncle Sam for 12 consecutive years, and the money paid off. Because by 1982, we had a new president, Ronald Reagan, a man whose official policy was that monopolies were efficient, and so he dropped the case and Big Blue wriggled off the hook. It is hard to regulate a monopolist, it is hard to regulate a cartel. When a sector is composed of hundreds of competing companies, they compete. They are genuinely fighting with one another, trying to poach each other's best customers, each other's best employees. They are at one another's throats, and it is hard enough to get executives to agree on anything when there's a couple of hundred of them. But when they're legitimately competing with one another, when they're actually trying to eat each other's lunch, they can't agree on anything. The second one of them goes to a regulator with some bullshit story about how it's impossible to make a decent search engine without fine-grained commercial surveillance, or how it's impossible to make a secure and easy-to-use mobile operating system without a total veto over which software you can install, or how it's impossible to run an ISP that gives you the data that you request and not the data from the services that are paid for premium carriage. There's always going to be some other company saying, no, that's bullshit. We managed it. Here's our server logs, here's our quarterly financials, and here's our customer testimonials. When you have 100 companies, you have a rabble, you have a mob. They can't agree on a common lobbying position. They're too busy eating each other's lunches to agree on how to cater a meeting where they would discuss a common lobbying position. But let those companies merge, gobble each other up in an incestuous orgy that turns them into 5 giant companies so inbred that they get corporate Habsburg jaws, and they will become a cartel. And it's easy for a cartel to agree on what bullshit they're going to tell their regulators and to mobilize some of those excess profits they have because they don't have to engage in wasteful competition and capture their regulators completely. You know, Congress used to actually pass federal privacy laws. Not anymore. The last time Congress managed to pass a federal consumer privacy law was in 1988 when they passed a law called the Video Privacy Protection Act that bans video store clerks from telling newspapers which VHS cassettes you took home. That is the last time we passed a federal privacy law, and it pertains to 3 things that either don't exist or barely exist today. Your video rental history was not the last privacy threat we faced in this country, and yet Congress has been deadlocked for 40 years. Tech companies' regulatory capture involves a risible and transparent gambit that is so stupid, it is an insult to all those good, hardworking, risible, transparent gambits out there doing what they do. What they claim is that when they violate your consumer, your privacy, or your labor rights, that it doesn't count because they did it with an app. Algorithmic discrimination, that's not illegal wage theft. We did it with an app. Spying on you from asshole to appetite, that's not a privacy violation. We did it with an app. Amazon's scams search tool that tricks you into paying 29% extra if you click the first link when you search, that's not a ripoff because they did it with an app. Once we killed competition, once we stopped putting down rat poison, we got cartels and the rats came and ate our faces. And the cartels captured their regulators, that's the rats buying out the rat poison factories and shutting them down, and companies are no longer constrained by competition, nor are they constrained by regulation. But you know what? Tech is different. It's different because tech is flexible. Because our computers are these Turing-complete universal von Neumann machines, which means that any enshittificatory alteration to a program that you rely on, including something that makes a gadget that you use work, can be disenshittified with another program. Every time HP jacks up the price of ink, they invite a competitor to make a refill kit or a third-party cartridge. When Tesla installs code that says you have to pay an extra upsell to use the whole charging capacity of your battery, they invite a modder to make a kit that will let you use your whole battery without paying Tesla. Let me take you through an example of how this works. Imagine that we are all having a product design meeting for our website strategy for the next year. I know this is a stretch for a Burning Man crowd. And the guy leading the meeting says, dudes, you know how our KPI is top line ad revenue? Well, I've done some back of the envelope math and I've calculated that if we make the ads 20% more obnoxious and invasive, we will get a 2% increase in those KPIs. Now that is a good pitch. You hit that KPI, everyone gets a fat bonus and they get to take their families on luxury ski vacations to Switzerland. But here's the thing, at that meeting, someone's gonna stick their hand up. Someone who doesn't necessarily give a shit about the users or their well-being, and that person is gonna say, Elon, I love how you think. But has it occurred to you that if we make these ads 20% shittier, then 40% of our users are gonna go to the search engine and type in, how do I block ads? I mean, what a fucking nightmare. Because once the user does that, the revenue from that user, it doesn't go up to 102%. It doesn't stay at the status quo ante of 100%. The revenue from that user falls to zero and it never comes back. Do we know why the revenue never comes back? Nobody ever went back to the search engine and typed, how do I start seeing ads again? So once the user jailbreaks their phone, once they discover third-party ink, once they develop a relationship with an independent Tesla mechanic who'll unlock all the DLC for a single price, that user is gone forever. Interoperability, that latent property bequeathed to us by Herrs von Neumann and Turing, and their infinitely flexible universal machines represent a serious check on enshittification. The fact that Congress has not passed a new privacy law since 1988 is countered, at least in part, by the fact that the majority of web users are now running ad blockers, which are also tracking blockers. They're privacy tools. But no one has ever installed a tracker blocker for an app, because reverse engineering that app puts you in jeopardy of criminal and civil liability under Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, with penalties of a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine for a first offense. And violating the terms of service puts you in jeopardy under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986, a law that President Reagan signed in a panic after, no kidding, watching Matthew Broderick in the movie War Games. Helping others violate the terms of service will bring the contract lawyers out who will call you a tortfeasor, guilty of tortious interference with their contracts. All that nonsense that we call IP, but which Jay Freeman from the Cydia Project calls felony contempt of business model. So imagine we're still at that product meeting, we've decided not to make the website any shittier, but someone says, well, what about the app? What if we make the app 20% more obnoxious with its invasive ads and get the 2% ad revenue increase from the app? That person puts their hand back up, the person who objected last time, but he doesn't object this time. This time he says, you're thinking too small. If we can get a 2% increase by making the ads 20% more obnoxious, why don't we get the 10% increase by making the ads 100% more obnoxious? Because we don't care if the user goes to the search engine and types, how do I stop seeing ads in this app? Because the answer is, you can't. So YOLO, let's enshittify away. IP is just a euphemism for a law that lets a company reach beyond the four walls of its facilities and exert control over its customers, its critics, and its competitors. An app is just a synonym for a web page wrapped in the right kind of IP that it becomes a felony to defend your privacy or block the ads. Interop used to stop companies from enshittifying. If a company made the client suck, someone made an alternative client. If they ripped a feature out and then tried to sell it back to you as an upsell or a subscription, someone made a compatible plugin that just restored it to you for free or a one-time cost. To help people flee MySpace, Facebook gave its users bots. You loaded those bots with your login credentials, your username and password. It would log it as you to MySpace several times a day, scrape all the messages waiting for you there, move back to Facebook, put them in your inbox, you could reply to them there, and it would autopilot them back out onto MySpace. So you never had to choose between the people you loved on MySpace and Facebook, which at the time launched with a promise that they would never spy on you. Do you remember that? 2006, Facebook is the privacy-forward alternative to MySpace and will never spy on you. Thanks to the metastasis of IP, all of that is off the table today. Apple owes its very existence to a package called the iWork suite, Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, which read and write the Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files. But if you made an iOS runtime that'll play back the files that you bought from Apple and their app and their media stores, they will nuke you until you glow. Facebook would have not had a hope of breaking MySpace's hegemony without that scraping tool. But if you scrape Facebook today in support of an alternative client, their lawyers will bomb you until the rubble bounces. Google scraped every website in the world to create a search index. Try and scrape Google, your head will be on a pike in Mountain View. When they did it to us, that was progress. When we do it to them, that is piracy, and every pirate dreams of being an admiral. And because this handful of companies has so thoroughly captured their regulators, they can wield the power of the state against you when you try to break their grip over you, even as their own flagrant violations of your rights go unpunished by those same regulators. Tech lost its fear of competition. It neutralized the threat from regulators, and then it put those regulators in harness and attacked the new startups that would do unto them as they did unto the incumbents when they emerged. But even so, there was a force that kept tech bosses' enshittificatory impulses in check, and that force was tech workers. Tech workers have historically been in very short supply, which gave them power, and their bosses knew it. To get tech workers to work those crazy hours, tech bosses came up with a trick. They appealed to tech workers' love of technology and told them, you are the heroes of a digital revolution. You are going to organize the world's information and make it useful. You are going to bring the world closer together. They bring in expert set dressers and they convert the workplaces into whimsical campuses with free laundry, gourmet cafeterias, massages, and kombucha, and a doctor on hand who will freeze your eggs so you can work through your fertile years. They convinced tech workers that they were being pampered, not that they were being worked like government mules. Now this trick, it actually has a name. The librarian theorist Fobazi Ettar, she calls it vocational awe. Elon Musk had a much blunter name for it. He calls it being extremely hardcore. And the extremely hardcore trick works well. We did put in some long ass hours chasing our bosses' arbitrary deadlines. But for our bosses, this trick failed badly. Because if you miss your mother's funeral to hit a deadline, and then your boss orders you to enshittify the product that you missed that funeral to ship, you are going to experience a profound moral injury, and you will use the fact that your boss can't replace you to make sure that your boss experiences your profound moral injury too. Because what the fuck are they going to do? Fire you? They can't hire someone else to do your job, and you can get a job that's even better at the shop across the street. So workers held the line when competition, regulation, and interoperability failed. But eventually, supply catches up with demand. Last calendar year, 2023, 260,000 tech layoffs. First 6 months of this year, another 100,000 tech layoffs. And no one's telling their bosses to go fuck themselves, because they will fire your ass and give your job to someone who will be only too happy to enshittify the product that you refuse to make worse. That's why enshittification is happening right now. Our bosses are not different. They did not catch a mind virus that turned them into greedy assholes who don't care about users' well-being or the quality of their products. As far as our bosses have always been concerned, the point of the business was to charge the most, spend the least, and share as little as possible with suppliers, workers, and users and customers. They were not running charities. They were trying to maximize profits. Since day one, our bosses showed up for work, sat down at their desk in the C-suite, grabbed the lever behind that desk, marked enshittification, and pulled it as hard as they could. But the lever didn't move much. It was gummed up by competition, by regulation, by interoperability, and by worker power. And as those sources of friction melted away, the enshittification levers started moving very freely indeed, which sucks, I know. But think about this for a second. Our bosses, despite being wildly imperfect vessels, capable of rationalizing endless greed and cheating, nevertheless made a series of actually great products and services, not because they were better people than they are today, but because they were subject to discipline. So it follows that if we want to end the enshitticene, if we want to dismantle the enshitternet and build a new good internet that our bosses can't wreck, we need to make sure that those constraints are durably installed on that new good internet, that they're wound around its nerves and its roots, and then we have to stand guard over it so that it can't be dismantled again. A new good internet is one that has the positive aspects of that old good internet, the ethic of technological self-determination, where users of technology and hackers and tinkerers and startups and others who serve as proxies for technology users can reconfigure and modify the technology that they use so that it does what you need it to do and isn't used against you. But the new good internet will also fix the defects of that old good internet, the part that made it hard for anyone to use who wasn't already technical. And hell yeah, we can do that. I mean, tech bosses swear that it is impossible, that you can't have a conversational friend without letting Zuck listen in on it. Or you can't search the web without letting Google scrape you down to your viscera. Or that you can't have a phone that works reliably without Apple having a veto over the software you install. They claim that it's a nonsense to even ponder this sort of thing. It's like making water that's not wet. But that is bullshit. We absolutely can have nice things. We can build for the people that we love and give them a place that is worthy of their time and attention. And to do that, we have to install constraints. Now, the first constraint, if you'll recall, was competition. And we are living through an epochal shift in competition policy. After 40 years of antitrust enforcement in an induced coma, a wave of antitrust vigor has swept through governments all over the world. Regulators are stepping in to ban monopolistic practices, to open up walled gardens, to block anti-competitive mergers, and even unwind the corrupt mergers that were undertaken on false pretenses. Now, normally, when I give a speech like this is the part where I list out all the amazing things that have happened over the past 4 years, the enforcement actions that block companies from becoming too big to care, and that scared companies from even trying, like Wiz, which last month noped out of the largest acquisition offer in history. They turned down $23 billion that Google offered them as a carrot, and decided to, just run a fucking business that makes a product that they charge money for, that people like, and that is fairly priced. Now, normally I'd be listing out the FTC rulemakings, like the one that was just overturned by a court in Texas, but is going to be appealed, that overturned non-competes nationwide, or the new merger guidelines that the FTC and the DOJ cooked up together that make privacy an element that is explicitly considered when firms attempt to merge. I had a whole section like this in the original draft of the speech, and I tore it out about 3 weeks ago. Can anyone guess why? What precipitated that? Does anyone know? 3 weeks ago, Judge Amit Mehta, that's right, ruled for the DC Court of these United States of America in a docket 20-3010, a case known as United States versus Google LLC, and found that Google was, quote, a monopolist and acted as a monopolist in order to maintain its monopoly, and ordered that Google and the DOJ propose a schedule for a remedy like breaking the company up. Yeah. So, pretty fucking epic. Now, antitrust stuff, it is pretty esoteric, and I'm not going to gatekeep you or shame you if you want to keep a little distance on this subject. Nearly everyone is going to be an antitrust normie. I have made my peace with that. But if you are an antitrust normie, you're probably only catching little bits and pieces that slip over the transom into the mainstream discourse. And let me tell you, the monopolists know that you're not paying the attention to every little detail, and so they are flooding the zone with shit. The Wall Street Journal has published over 100 editorials describing the FTC chair Lena Khan as an ineffectual do-nothing who wastes public funds chasing doomed quixotic adventures against poor innocent businesses and accomplishes nothing. Now, do we know who owns the Wall Street Journal? Who owns the Wall Street Journal? Rupert Murdoch. Do we really think Rupert Murdoch is paying his editorial board to write 100 op-eds about someone who's not getting anything done? The reality is that in the United States, in the UK, in the EU, in Australia, in Canada, and even in China, we are seeing more antitrust action over the past 4 years than we saw over the past 40 years. Remember, the competition law is actually pretty robust. The problem isn't the law, it's the enforcement priorities. Reagan put antitrust in mothballs 40 years ago. But that elegant weapon from a more civilized age is now back in the hands of people who know how to use it, and they are swinging for the fences. So the next constraint is regulation. As the seemingly inescapable power of tech giants is revealed for the sham that it always was, governments and regulators are finally ready to kill the one weird trick of violating the law and saying it doesn't count because you did it with an app. So in the EU, they're rolling out the Digital Markets Act this year. It's a law that requires dominant platforms to stand up APIs. Very good, yes. Stand up APIs so that third parties can offer interoperable services. So if you're a co-op or a nonprofit or a hobbyist or a startup or a local government, you'll be able to offer soon your own alternative to Facebook or Twitter, and people who leave Facebook and Twitter will still be able to communicate with the people who aren't ready to go yet. Just like if you change phone carriers, you can still talk to the people you talked to when you had your old SIM in your phone. And that means the switching costs fall to basically zero. Now that is a very cool rule, but what's more interesting is how it's being enforced. Previous EU rules were transposed into European law, like the GDPR, the General Data Privacy Regulation. And what that meant was that each country in the EU enforced the law separately. And practically speaking, that meant that if a tech company violated your privacy in Europe, the case would be heard in Ireland. Because Ireland is a tax haven, and every tax haven is a crime haven. If a company can fly an Irish flag of convenience, then they can pretend to be Cypriot next week, or Maltese, or Luxembourgeois. So Ireland has to keep that footloose capital from stepping across the border into another country. And that's why the GDPR has turned into such a joke in practice. Big tech wipes its ass on the GDPR because the only way to punish them has to start with Ireland's privacy commissioner, and this is a useless do-nothing agency that barely gets out of bed, and when it does, it hangs out all morning in its pajamas eating breakfast cereal and watching cartoons. This is not a secret. The European Commission knows that this is going on, so with the DMA, they took a different enforcement approach. With the DMA, all cases start with the federal court in Europe. And that means that that court, which has no impetus to let those companies skate, is going to be your first port of call when they violate the law. That means that we violate privacy law, but it doesn't matter, we do it with an app. That's a dead letter now, because the DMA integrates the GDPR. And so GDPR enforcement is going to start at the European federal level too. Here in the US, the dam is finally breaking on consumer privacy law. Remember, the last privacy law we passed in 1988 was that law that banned VHS cassette rental history from being disclosed. It has been a minute, and the thing is, there are a lot of people in this country who are angry about something that connects with privacy law. You know, maybe you think that Facebook made Grampy into a QAnon, or that the reason your teenager is anorexic is because of Insta, or maybe you think that TikTok is brainwashing the millennials in your life into quoting Osama bin Laden. Or maybe you're worried that cops rolled up the identities of everyone at a Black Lives Matter demonstration by subpoenaing their location data from Google, or that they did the same thing to the January 6 rioters, or that red state attorneys general follow teenagers using their phones across state lines and into abortion clinics, or that black people who apply for loans or mortgages or jobs online get discriminated against because the company has a dossier about them. or that someone made an AI deepfake porn of you. The federal privacy law that we don't have, a privacy law with a private right of action, meaning you can sue even if the Attorney General doesn't want to take your case, would go a long way to resolving that. And that means that the coalition for privacy law passage in this country is now gigantic. And that means that we're now seeing a procession of excellent but flawed privacy laws that get better every time being introduced into Congress. If you sign up for the mailing list at EFF.org, I work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, although these are my opinions, not theirs. If you sign up at EFF.org for our mailing list and tell us your zip code, when there's a vote on this, you can make an appointment to talk to your Congress critter when they come back to their constituent. You can call their constituency office and explain to them that this matters. That stuff really makes a difference. So what about self-help? How are we doing on making interoperability great again? So hackers can just fix shit without waiting for Congress or a federal agency to act to disenshittify things. All the action here these days is on state right to repair bills, like the right to repair bill that just passed in Oregon. That law bans parts pairing. That's the practice where when you put a part into a device, the device refuses to use it until the manufacturer supplies an unlock code. Those bills are pushed by a fantastic group called the Repair Coalition at repair.org. And again, if you sign up on the mailing list at repair.org, you will get an email when one of these is coming through your state house, and also when it finally gets introduced federally. Now, there's the final way that we're going to make things better, and that's through restoring the power of tech workers. For years, tech workers' bosses tricked them into thinking that they were founders in waiting, temporarily embarrassed entrepreneurs who were only momentarily drawing a salary. They certainly weren't workers. Their power came from their intrinsic value, not like the lazy slobs who are in unions and get their power through kumbaya solidarity nonsense. Now that was a trick. Those tech workers were scammed. The power they had came from scarcity, and when the scarcity ended, when the industry started ringing up six-figure annual layoffs, the power went away. The only durable source of worker power is as workers in unions. Think about Amazon. Warehouse workers have to piss in bottles and have the highest rate of on-the-job maimings of any warehouse workers in the sector. Whereas Amazon coders show up for work with facial piercings, green mohawks, and black t-shirts that say things their bosses don't understand. And they get to piss whenever they want. Now, Jeff Bezos and Andy Jassy don't love those workers. That's not why they're treating them so well. It's because they're scared that those workers are gonna quit and they don't know how to replace them. Another William Gibson quote, "The future is here, it's not evenly distributed." But you know who's living in the future? Amazon blue-collar workers, warehouse workers, and drivers. They're on the bleeding edge. Drivers whose eyeballs are monitored by AI cameras that do digital phrenology on their faces to figure out whether to take away some of their paychecks. Warehouse workers whose bodies are ruined in just months by the overseer that comes in an app. As tech bosses beef up their reserved army of unemployed, skilled tech workers, then those tech workers, maybe some of you, will arrive at the same future as those Amazon warehouse workers and drivers. I know the best tech workers among us have spent their whole careers explaining in words so small their bosses can understand them why they refuse to enshittify the company's products, and I salute them for that service. But if those tech workers want to go on fighting for the user, they need a power that's more durable than scarcity. They need unions. And you can learn how by checking out the Tech Workers Coalition and Tech Solidarity and get organized. Enshittification did not happen because our bosses changed. They were always that guy. They were always yanking on that enshittification lever in the C-suite. What changed was the environment, everything that kept the switch from moving. And it's good news in a kind of bank shot way because it means that we can make good services out of imperfect people. As a wildly imperfect person myself, I find that heartening. A new good internet is in our grasp. An internet that has the technological self-determination of that old good internet and the grease skid simplicity of Web 2.0 that let all our normie friends get in on the fun. Tech bosses want you to think that good UX and enshittification can't ever be separated. And that is such a self-serving proposition, you can spot it from orbit. We know it because we built the old good internet. And we fought that rear guard action to preserve it for decades. It's time that we stop playing defense and go on the offense, to restore competition, to restore regulation, interoperability, and the power of tech workers through unions. And if we do that, we can build a new good internet, and that's what we're going to need if we're going to fight fascism, save ourselves from the climate emergency, and end genocide. If we're going to build a digital nervous system for this 21st century in which our children can thrive and prosper. Thank you. I'm going to go outside and we can talk out there. We should clear out for the next speaker. Thank you all for coming.
If you want more time, we have at 2 p.m. we have Stephanie.